Good evening. We want to welcome everyone to our City of Little Rock Board of Directors agenda meeting to schedule it for October the 2nd, 2024. We'll have a very brief presentation on the National Night Out updates from Director Kevin Howard. Then we'll do the fire prevention proclamation after that.
Good afternoon, Mayor, to the Board of Directors. Thank you again for letting me come out and speak about our National Night Out. National Night Out will be held October the 1st. We have four locations throughout the city of Little Rock. Also, we have some other neighborhood associations will be hosting National Night Out too as well, but we have four main locations that the city of Little Rock will be supporting with our Little Rock Police Department, as well as our Little Rock Fire Department, our code enforcement staff, neighborhood resource specialists, and other staff such as Parks and Rec that will be out inviting the residents to come out and enjoy the time that they have as we promote camaraderie, community partnerships, foster neighborhood connections to make our community safer and more caring places to live. The concept of National Night Out dates back to 1971 with an officer visiting a neighborhood event, since evolved from a neighborhood watch event into much more. As many of you come out to celebrate National Night Out with neighbors, with residents of the city of Little Rock and our neighbors, it's a chance for neighbors and law enforcement to come together in a positive way and build trust. It's an opportunity to bring neighbors and city resources together under positive circumstances and build meaningful connections. This year, the city of Little Rock is centralizing a National Night Out, coordinating with neighborhood associations to host events in 4 key areas, led by our neighborhood resource specialists under housing neighborhood programs. And our goal is to unite the communities along residents to connect with the other and city staff to make this event more meaningful. We focus on these centralized locations. We're supporting neighborhoods with established events by offering resources and assistance. As you go out, you'll see we have nonprofit organizations, businesses that will have tables set up in these 4 areas to provide the services that they have for our residents of the city of Little Rock. So these areas are, you can go to the next slide. These areas are Southwest Little Rock, it's 6401 Baseline Road, West Central Community Center, and that's 8616 Colonel Glenn Road, MacArthur Park, 1000 McMath Avenue, and then at War Memorial, we'll be at One Stadium Drive in Little Rock. National Night Out is our annual great opportunity to promote unity and enhance relationships across the city. I encourage each resident to get out and support these locations and residents in the area in the city of Little Rock. Thank you so much. Do you have any questions for me?
Vice Mayor Webb.
Thank you, Mayor Scott. Thank you, Director Howard. I have one question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned something about nonprofits being at some of the events. If you knew of a nonprofit that wanted to participate, do they contact you?
Yes, ma'am. They can contact the office at 501-371-6825.
371-6825.
Yes. Or they can contact Valeria Tate too as well. She spearheads National Night Out with the neighborhood resource specialist too as well.
Thank you.
Yep.
Director Adcock, as you know, for the past 5 years, I've defeated you in going to a number of different the locations. And so, well, I said it during the press conference. I want to make sure I say it here again. I know Norman's about 18 and 19. And so for your benefit, we're consolidating. So hopefully you can beat me now with 4 or 5. You got. Oh, hold on 1 second. I got you.
I will repeat that.
Yeah.
It was because you do not want to be beaten one more time. But that's okay because you're the 3rd mayor that's been beaten.
I beg to differ, but I always beat her. She just. I don't know why she's not respecting that today, but it's okay. All right. Director Hines.
Mayor, I was going to say, if we're on a level playing field, I think we can talk to the police chief about giving her a police escort since you already have your own private detail.
Actually, it's not, because I said that during the press conference, because she says the only reason why I beat her because she has a cane and I don't. All in good fun, all in good fun. Thank you so much. But seriously, for those who are watching online, please get with our housing neighborhood programs. If you are a nonprofit that would like to participate, be a part of the process, we take all the nonprofits who want to come to these strategic locations. Director Phillips.
I just want to make it clear for those watching online, Mayor. So since we have National Night Out on Tuesday, we're going to meet Wednesday of next week. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Just want to make sure that the community knew that.
Yes, it's that important to us that we transition our city board meeting to the Wednesday. I'll now ask Vice Mayor Webb to join me at the podium. Members of the City Board, Vice Mayor Webb and I are here today to proclaim Fire Prevention Week alongside Chief Delphon Hubbard. Whereas the City of Little Rock is deeply committed to ensuring the safety and security of all residents and visitors, fostering a community where public safety is a priority, and whereas fire remains a critical public safety concern both locally and nationally, with homes being the locations where people are the greatest risk of the fire-related injury or death. And whereas from January 1st, 2024 to September 16, 2024, the U.S. Fire Administration reported 15 civilian fire fatalities in the state of Arkansas, but 0 within the city of Little Rock, underscoring the importance of continued fire safety measures in our city. And whereas it is a well-known fact that working smoke alarms save lives, due to the prevalence of systematic or synthetic materials in modern construction, house fires now burn faster, hotter, and emit more toxic smoke, reducing escape time to just 2 to 3 minutes. Early warnings from smoke alarms can provide the precious seconds needed to escape safely. Whereas the Fire Chief, Delphon Hubbard, and the dedicated men and women of the Little Rock Fire Department are committed to reducing the occurrence of house fires, as well as fire-related fatalities and injuries, through proactive education, prevention initiatives, and community engagement. And whereas the theme for Fire Prevention Week 2024, Smoke Alarms Make Them Work for You, emphasized the critical importance of ensuring that every home is equipped with working smoke alarms. This year's campaign aims to educate the public about life-saving impact of properly installed and maintained smoke alarms. Now, therefore, I, Frank Scott Jr., Mayor of the City of Little Rock, hereby proclaim October 6th through the 12th, 2024 as Fire Prevention Week. Chief Hubbard.
Thank you, Mayor, City Manager, and to members of this board. On behalf of the men and women of the Little Rock Fire Department, I say thank you for your continuous support, your continuous display of support through providing us with the resources and means we need in order to continue to provide an efficient fire department for this community. Thank you.
I was just curious, do we give out smoke detectors to the public, or do we check them, or what? Don't we do something proactively?
Yes, sir. We do. To your question, we do. This summer, the mayor started Project Impact, where we have designated areas, and it just coincidentally, I don't think it's coincidentally, but I'm going to use the word coincidentally, as part of Project Impact, we were hitting defined communities, providing city services, and part of that was the fire department was providing home inspections, as well as installing smoke detectors, replacing batteries, and not just in those particular areas, but we do it throughout the city all year long.
Okay. So
Free of charge to all residents of the city of Little Rock.
do they call you, they call and?
They do. When we're doing defined initiatives like that, they don't call. We go door to door. Many times after a fire, we'll do what we call a blitz of that community. Hit maybe several blocks in radius of that house that was impacted by fire. But yes, many times members of the community will either go online and go to our website, or either they'll call 501-918-3700 and request a smoke detector. And it's our goal to install that smoke detector within 24 hours of the request, because we don't want anything to happen in between the time of the request and.
Okay. Thanks, Chief. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you so much, Director Miller. We'll now have the brief presentation on the Little Rock Stormwater Drainage Manual update.
Good afternoon. My name is Miles Simmons. I'm with Half Associates. And for about the last year and a half, we've been working with the city on updating the Little Rock Stormwater Design Manual. And so we'll get into it. So first off, we'll just go over why we're updating the manual, go over some of the water quality regulations, explain the process that we went through, some of the plan changes, and then the potential impacts from these revisions. So first off, what is the Stormwater Management Manual? It provides guidelines and standards for the design and construction of drainage systems within the city. That applies to both public projects and private development. It also includes floodplain management, stream protection, and water quality. And it also addresses any state and federal regulations and permits. So first to begin, I'd just like to highlight some board policy statements that are directly, that the manual kind of directly impacts. So one is protection from loss or damage of property, ensuring the availability of safe and affordable housing, improving vehicular and pedestrian safety, and providing disaster assistance in natural and man-made emergencies. And then here's a couple other policy statements that are directly related to the manual. I think in that second one is really the crux behind the need for this update. And that's that the manual needs to meet the changing needs of the community while protecting the integrity of the environment. So why update? The manual was originally written in 1985 and has not significantly been updated since. And so the goal of this update is to adequately address future flood risk, new stormwater practices, and state and federal regulations. So this manual is part of the city's policies and programs to reduce pollutants in compliance with the MS4 permit that's issued by ADEQ. And so the three main goals of this manual update is to reduce flood risk, to improve water quality, and to protect streams. So first goal, to reduce flood risk. Obviously, the main goal of reducing flood risk is to protect lives and protect property. But there's also fiscal impacts to the city. Reducing flood risk is going to minimize the expenditure of public money on costly flood control projects, and to help maintain a stable tax base and prevent future flood blight areas. Water quality regulations. So one of the driving factors behind this manual update is our MS4 permit. And so that starts at the federal level with the Clean Water Act. But the federal government and the EPA allows the state to administer that MS4 program. And then the state, which is ADEQ, gets with the city and has a permit that the city has to follow. And so that permit says that we have to reduce to the maximum extent practical the discharge of pollutants from areas of new development and significant redevelopment after construction is completed. And so the goal is based on the ADEQ general permit, which is 80% removal of total suspended solids. So this manual is not the only part of the MS4 permit. There's a lot of other things that the city does to meet these water quality regulations. So that can be everything from illicit discharge prevention to industrial stormwater permitting, or practices done in the public right of way, which, like street sweeping. And then this map here shows the streams that are listed on the EPA's website as impaired water bodies. So back in 2020, there was only one stream, and now we're up to 5 streams that are listed as impaired. So that's another component of why we need to update this manual and start to address water quality.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Yes.
What happened where we increased from 1 to 5? Was that some ruling, or how did we get to where we only have 1 stream to now 5 streams?
That's just the EPA, and it's through the water.
Designated it.
Yeah,
Okay.
and it's through water quality monitoring. So they take samples and look at that, and it's based on the use of the stream.
Okay.
So the update process, our first step was to review the manual and benchmark against peer cities and identify any gaps in the existing manual. Second, we gathered stakeholder input, tried to determine the community priorities. The third step was to draft the manual, write the actual chapters and appendices. And then now, this is what we're in the 4th step, which is to present to the mayor and the board of directors, and then eventually adopt the new manual with a goal to implement the new manual in January of 2025 on all projects going forward. So we benchmarked against a lot of cities, both cities within Arkansas and other surrounding states that are kind of a similar makeup to Little Rock. Primarily, we looked at the city of Fayetteville, Memphis, Springfield, Missouri, Rogers, and Tulsa. And then we looked at some state agencies' manuals, and primarily that was the Georgia Stormwater Manual. And a lot of these other municipalities are based off that Georgia Stormwater Manual. So some of the key benchmarks, almost all the manuals used the new Atlas 14 rainfall. All drainage manuals required water quality treatment. The water quality treatment varied. Some cities just use a standard 1 inch of rainfall. Others base the rainfall off of like the 90th or 85th percentile storm. Only one manual required less than 100-year detention. And then the size of the stormwater system design storm varied pretty widely. And then the majority of these manuals have been undergone major revisions in the last 10 years, except for Memphis, which is currently also being revised. We did kind of just a basic analysis just to look at the growth patterns of some of these cities and look at when they implemented stricter drainage and water quality standards. And we really couldn't see any correlation between growth and water quality requirements. So for stakeholder input, at the beginning of the project, we built a website which hosted all of our updates. And you can go up there and download any of our draft documents, provided information on upcoming public meetings. We held a total of 13 public meetings and 3 different sets of meetings. The first set of meetings was back in May 2023. The second set was in March 2024. And then this last set of meetings was back in June of this year. We received 64 respondents to our survey. And then we compiled a stakeholder list of over 250 engineers, architects, developers, homeowners associations, and community groups. And we sent all of our project updates and meeting notifications to that stakeholder list. And then we held meetings and workshops with planning and development and public works to kind of guide the manual direction and address city comments as we gave them those draft chapters. So we had 64 respondents to our survey. Over half of those were local residents, and then about a third were engineers, architects. And the number one concern for people was flood risk, followed by impacts from future development, and then third was water quality. So the plan changes. I doubt most of you have read the current manual, but if you tried to, it's a very dense, hard to use document. So the number one goal is to modernize it, streamline the manual, improve readability and usability. Second main change is to address water quality, and then third was to update methods to standard practices. So here's the proposed outline. As you can see, a lot of the existing chapters were combined and condensed, and then we added a chapter on water quality. So the first two chapters are really about the submittal procedures and the requirements of the drainage reports. So really the purpose of this is to streamline the submittal process, so that will make it easier for the city to review submittals, and then also hopefully all those developments get through a quicker review process. Chapter 3, the major changes here were updating the atlas, updating the rainfall. So before we were using rainfall from the 60s and 70s, and now we're using the latest rainfall that NOAA has put out. And then we've also updated the methodology and changed that based on the size of the development. Chapters 4, 5, and 6 really just get into the details of the drainage system, which includes inlets, pipes, culverts, and roadside ditches. Really just combining, condensing chapters and updating some design storms and freeboard requirements. Like for instance, if a development only has one road in or out, we're requiring a higher design storm so that in case there is a flooding event, you still have access in and out of that development. Chapter 7 is stormwater detention. So this just goes over the guidance on stormwater runoff storage so that we're not increasing flows downstream. Before, we only analyzed the 25-year event, and now we're analyzing the 2 through 100-year storms to make sure that we're not causing flooding downstream. And for developments over 20 acres, we're now requiring a downstream analysis. So essentially, we want to make sure that due to timing or the volume of runoff coming from a new site, that we're not going to have impacts downstream. And so that's just a hydrologic study to determine if there's any increase in flows at that influence point. And chapter 8 is over water quality. So this is a new chapter, and it goes over all the criteria for water quality treatment, including low impact development and best management practices. So we developed what that rainfall or water quality treatment volume is, and that's just based on an analysis of the rainfall gauge here in Little Rock. And so that's 1.5 inches of runoff for new development and 1.3 inches of runoff for redevelopment. So this is an example of a wet detention pond. So essentially, before where you'd maybe just have just a detention pond just for storage, now you incorporate water quality into that detention. So you'd have a water quality treatment volume in your basin that is slowly released to let sediments settle out. And then above that, that's where you store your detention for your flood impacts. And then Appendix C provides a list of stormwater control measures and estimated pollution removal efficiencies. So these are essentially full chapters in of themselves on how to design and maintain these water quality features. And then Chapter 9 is really not a lot of changes, and it just goes over the construction site stormwater runoff management. And then the appendices. Appendix A is report and plan checklists, and Appendix B is an example submittal, just hopefully provide more consistent submittals to the city so that that review process goes a little easier and quicker. Appendix C is the stormwater BMPs that goes over the design of all of those. And then Appendix D and E are just going over erosion control sediments and then any references that we used in the manual. So this is just the example of the first couple of pages of one of those in Appendix C. It goes over all of the details on how to design and maintain those water quality treatment measures so that they're built correctly and don't require going in and fixing those down the road. So revision impacts. The drainage manual revisions will potentially impact the cost of both engineering and construction for development. This cost impact, though, is highly dependent on the type of development and the mitigation measures used. So for instance, that third item on that list, requiring the treating of 1.5 inches of rainfall runoff, before that wasn't done, so there is a cost for engineering analysis and then also a cost for the city to review that. However, the cost for the construction is really highly dependent on what control measures you select and how you integrate those into requirements that you already had. So can you incorporate that into some of your landscaping requirements or the detention that was already required? On the other hand, the revisions will have some benefits. So I broke that out into two different items. So for the detention and stormwater system requirements, that's going to result in increased public safety and protection of property, fewer nuisance flooding complaints, prolonging the life cycle of existing infrastructure, and reducing business interruption and economic impacts from flooding. And then on the water quality side, it's going to reduce the degradation of water quality, reduce stream bank erosion, which in turn should reduce the future maintenance burden on the city. And then preserving natural features can increase the value and sale price of homes. And those are just some of the examples to FEMA and EPA documents that back up some of those claims. So summary of changes. The major changes are updating the rainfall to newer, most up-to-date rainfall, requiring the detention up to the 100-year storm event, requiring water quality treatment of 1.5 inches and then 1.3 inches for redevelopment, and then making a minimum design storm of 25 years for roadway crossings. And with that, I'll take any questions from the mayor or board.
We'll first go with Director Peck had her hand up first, but I think it may be something different.
That was something else,
We'll
sorry.
wait. Okay. Director Phillips.
Thank you, Mayor. And I appreciate the report and update and the time and talent it takes to do this. I play around in this area sometimes, so I'm curious. So I have a couple questions. One, you said one of the updates were currently we have a retention for the 25-year event, and we're changing that to the 100-year event, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And for the public, that's not a 1 in 100 years. That's 1 in 100 times that we'll have that level of rainfall, correct?
Correct. That's a annual chance. So you have a 100-year storm is equivalent to a 1% chance every year.
Right. And so does that mean that the detention ponds that builders and developers would need to build would need to be larger based on this change?
In most instances, yes. It'll require an increase in the storage.
Okay. And obviously we want to comply with EPA and DEQ. So that leads me to my next question. When you were having these community meetings and meeting with neighborhoods and developers, did you get some pushback? Did people say, hey, we don't want this? And then you have to say, well, this is the law, so we're trying to protect people and protect flooding. I want to know what type of pushback or phone calls and emails I'm going to get about this so I can be prepared.
I would say for most of the feedback we got from community groups or just local residents was positive. They see that we need to do requirements to prevent future flooding. We did get pushback from a few developers. Primarily, it was 2 or 3 that had questions about it and concerns about increasing in cost. But it was really just a few engineering firms that we heard from.
But overall, the community was like, hey, let's make sure we prevent downstream flooding, so do what you got to do, basically.
Yes.
Okay. All right. All right. That's all I have. Thank you for all the work it takes to make these type of changes happen. I know it's not easy.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Director Hines.
Thanks. Thanks, Miles. So what percentage of the stormwater manual is going to be dictated by the new requirements of our MS4 permit that we haven't to my knowledge, received from ADQ, correct?
We haven't received the new, that our cycle for the MS4 permit comes up at the end of December. And so that's why we're addressing this now before that permit expires.
But if the permit expires and we don't have a new one in place, does the old permit not to continue to be in effect until we renew our permit with them?
Yes, but that's dependent on ADEQ.
But, okay, so I guess my question is, if ADEQ hasn't told us what the new requirements of the MS4 permit, how are we, it's like prescription, it's like diagnosis, or, Dean, what would that be? Prescribing before diagnosing?
So the way that the ADEQ permit actually works, it's kind of unintuitive. It's, you get your permit, and then you have until the end of the permit cycle to implement everything from the permit. So this is part of implementing our current permit, if that makes sense.
So what you're saying is we haven't been complying with our current permit?
No, you have up until the end of it to comply. So essentially, ADEQ says you have to treat stormwater management, or you have to treat stormwater quality, right? Okay. They don't say you have to have this done in 2 days. You have to have this done by the end of your next permit, or before your next permit starts.
So it was real curious that all of our peer cities are not from Central Arkansas. Why did you guys look at any of our suburban area cities, the Bentons, the Cabots, the ones that we compete directly with, and what they're doing?
So we did, but almost none of them have a drainage manual. And they don't really have much in the way of even drainage codes. I'll say anecdotally, from my experience of working with some of these other cities, they are looking at adding more requirements because they keep finding issues and they run into things where they don't really have a way to address it. And so they're looking at implementing more standards and regulations so that they can address those issues as they come up.
Another thing, I'd like a copy of this presentation. And just a note to staff, I'd prefer to have these presentations beforehand if we can get them. It lets us be better prepared than getting a lot of very technical data for us to be able to respond to and ask questions. Are the new changes published yet for public review?
Yes, I believe the most up-to-date version of the manual should be on that website.
Okay, all right, because I'm sure we're going to get some questions. So, how much did you guys? I know you talked about it seems to be real focused on new development, but did you guys look at the impacts on any redevelopment areas of the city and what that potential could do as far as affordable housing goes?
So one thing that we did look at, and is actually a change that we made through the revision process when we talked to Public Works. We were originally looking at, depending on the type of street, on updating the stormwater management design storm. So for like principal arterials, which are our big, large roads, we were originally going to have to meet the 100-year design storm for those. But when we look at that in the context of redevelopment, you can't tie your 100-year storm into a system that was designed for the 25-year. Okay. And so we went back and changed that back to the 25-year, which is what our current regulation is.
Okay. Another curious question. So were you aware that our original stormwater manual in 1985 basically said that all of these stormwater detention facilities being built were going to be maintained by the city once they were built and inspected by the city? And that was changed at a staff level. Probably, I've been on the board almost 14 years, either right before I got on the board or right after, unbeknownst to POAs and developers. So I guess how do we address who's going to inspect and maintain these new detention facilities?
So I think in the manual, we've added some wording and requirements about having a maintenance plan. So that when a development comes in, there'll have to be a entity that's going to maintain both the detention and the water quality. and there'll have to be a maintenance plan in place at the time of construction.
Who's going to do the inspections of those?
I think the inspections would be up to the city, and I think that really is kind of dependent on the staff availability.
Is the city currently inspecting our stormwater detention facilities and our stormwater facilities per RMS 4 permit?
I believe we are, but we can double check that.
So we're meeting our requirement of inspecting over the last 5 years, 20% of our stormwater detention and facilities over the we've done that? Well, no, our manual requires us to inspect our own stormwater facilities and those that are built in place. We're supposed to be, our own MS4 permit says we're supposed to be inspecting 20% of our system a year.
That may be something we have to do with public works.
I think we ought to, if we're gonna be, supposed to be saying we're complying with ADEQ and we're about to add a bunch of costs to doing development in this city. I think that's it for now. I will get with the folks that have an engineering degree to tell us what the actual impacts of this are gonna be, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Director Pierce.
Thank you for your report. Can you tell me how what you did goes along with what we did with the consent decree? What, 20 years ago, John? How long ago did we have the consent decree with overflow and wastewater and things like that?
Yeah, I don't think that that's really related to this. This is strictly stormwater, and so that doesn't really get into the wastewater. I know that stormwater infiltration into the wastewater system.
That's my point. The part of the consent decree was how we took care of stormwater because it made the manholes come off the wastewater. I mean,
what? Sorry. I think the decree was more about wastewater having their system in a condition where it wouldn't allow that inflow and infiltration of stormwater to get into their system to cause that overflow. And stop me if I'm saying something wrong, but it wasn't that we needed to change where the stormwater was going. They needed to make their system where it couldn't allow that stormwater to get into it. Was their decree.
And I think you're right, but how do the two, I mean, the problem we were having, isn't that right, Tom, was how?
I laughed because it went off just as I started talking. One of the major problems we had in the litigation was SSOs, which means
Sanitary sewer overflows.
I knew the overflow part, and that, and that was the water getting in there. But what we had to do was redesign the system so that its capacity was such that it wouldn't just knock off the tops every time we had a storm, which was happening with great frequency.
So back to my original question, how are the two related? Because they are related. I mean, did we take that into consideration?
Not, I mean, the only consideration would be with how we're designing the allowable spread in the streets. And so that,
Director
when you have an
Pierce,
inlet-
by law, it's two separate things. It's just to make sure.
Yeah, but the primary, as they were both saying, is that it was really more of a wastewater capacity issue rather than changes that needed to be made to the stormwater system. Is changes that need to be made to the wastewater system.
Well, my second question is, could you tell me what water quality is?
So, I mean, water quality is just what the pollutant load in our streams is, and those pollutants can vary. I mean, that can be anything from litter to heavy metals, E. coli, or nutrients. The primary ones would be nutrients, most likely.
Then how do we define that? I mean, you said water quality, I think, 10 times, and then I quit counting.
Right, so the way that we treat for water quality and stormwater runoff is really to use these best management practices or stormwater control measures to let water either infiltrate through a medium, through like soil or sand, or to detain it so that the particles can settle out before it gets discharged into a stream.
So do we monitor the efflux? Do we monitor what comes out of the, how do we monitor what goes into the streams?
So we won't require monitoring at a development level, but the city is required by ADQ to do water quality sampling kind of throughout the city at different streams. It'd be too burdensome on development to require testing at each detention basin. But we're just using national studies and like research to show if you design these correctly, you should see this level of removal of pollutants.
And Brad, are we doing that now?
I would say I'm pretty sure that the city is doing that stormwater monitor quality or water quality monitoring.
We do water quality monitoring now. We've done it for decades.
Okay, thank you.
I think some of that can actually be found on the ADQ website.
Thank you.
Director Warwick? You're on.
Okay, thank you. I couldn't see the red on there. Thank you for your presentation. I also would like a copy of this in case I get questions like Director Hines was saying. The question to you was, did you compare Little Rock to like Benton or Bryant? And something in the context made me think that maybe they don't have a MS4 permit, or maybe it's not as strict as what ours is, or what was the context of you not looking at Benton and Bryant and comparing to Little Rock? You said they got problems and then they fixed something, and what was that about?
So I guess there's a couple different things in that. So one is most of these surrounding communities don't have a drainage manual like the city of Little Rock does. Some of these cities.
How did they get away with doing that? If this is a standard that people have to have, why does Benton and Bryant not have to do that?
So there's also a second part to that question, where is the MS4 program.
I'm sorry?
The MS4 program.
Okay.
So the city of Little Rock is currently the only large MS4 in the state, and that's just based on population. So the city has an individual permit that they have to, the ADQ writes the permit specifically for Little Rock, and then we have to comply with those requirements. Whereas all the others are small MS4s, and so there's a general permit. So in that general permit, there's things that they have to meet. Now, even though those cities don't have a drainage manual, they are doing some of those practices within a stormwater management program.
But not to the level City of Little Rock is required to do it.
Most of the requirements are actually fairly similar, but they just don't have some of the other standards that the city has.
Okay.
And then their permit cycle is on a different time frame than the city.
But to clarify, that's because of population size. I mean, if Arkansas had 4 or 5 cities with a population similar to Little Rock's, then there would be 4 or 5 cities doing manuals. Is that right?
Well, the drainage manual and the MS4 are two separate things. But
the quality standards.
The water quality standards are all in the MS4. The manual, which includes more than just the water quality, is kind of a separate document.
Okay. My other question has to do with, today we do stormwater detention, and I think I'm right about this, you can help me out on it, but I think when a developer does his project, he looks at not increasing the water flow off his particular project, and he sets up his stormwater detention to handle that and slowly release. And I heard you say something about there's a change, and the change has to do with the downstream water. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Because I've already heard some developers that are very concerned about what we're looking at in order to do the detention.
Right, so yes, that's correct. That currently what we look at is the pre-development flow from the site and then the post-development flow from the site. So the post-development cannot be higher than the pre-development. But that's really just looking at the peak flow. And so when you're doing an analysis, there's actually a time component to that flow. You get a hydrograph. So there's a peak to that hydrograph and then it comes back down. And for some of these larger developments, even though you meet the peak is lower than pre-development, further downstream, because of the timing of other streams coming in, it could cause an issue. Even though if you're looking at, it really just depends on where you're looking at that outfall. And so with the bigger sites, we wanted to make sure that we're looking at a bigger picture. It's the 10% rule is what it's called, essentially where your site is 10% of the entire watershed. And that's just to ensure that further downstream, we're not causing problems and make sure we're not missing something by looking too small at the development.
So can you quantify that with like 5 acres, 10 acres, 25 acres? Or do you have other variables like the terrain and in order to consider whether you've got to do the downstream, include the downstream into your project?
Yeah, so if your site was 20 acres, you need to analyze downstream until the whole watershed is 200 acres.
If you have 5 acres, 10 acres?
We're not going to require it for those smaller sites. Really,
So 20 acres is the
20 acres and
benchmark?
above. Yeah, and then you're correct that does kind of depend on the terrain and the size of the watershed.
So you could
and
have a
how
5
close you
acre-
are to a major stream. So if you're close to a major stream, you'd really only have to analyze to where you dump into that major stream.
So I don't see your sheet where you showed, it's gone off of our screen, but where you showed the impact for the changes. Did you reflect the impact for downstream, having to deal with the 20 acres in your cost? Was that part of your analysis?
Yeah, so this table that I showed in the presentation, this is only a few of the items. We have a 13-page document that kind of goes over the major changes.
Okay.
And I think that is one of the ones that's outlined.
But that's
in
going to
there.
represent some additional cost for the development.
Yeah, so for the engineering analysis.
Yeah, but a Benton or Bryant doesn't have to do that, or somewhere else around central Arkansas.
Yeah, it really depends on whatever their city's requirements are.
Okay, you said something about the arterial roadways when you're building I'm thinking you're talking about streets, arterial roadways, and you said that it would require a 100-year floodplain, but because of some reasons, you only went to 25. You're only going to 25 years. So is there some flexibility in this permitting process that if we've got a situation where normally you do 100, you can drop back to 25? Are there other variables to look at?
Yeah, so when it comes to the design storm, there's a lot of different factors for that. And we really look at it from 2 or 3 different avenues. So one of the design storms is for detention. So that's how much flow is going downstream. And then another portion of the design storm is just for your inlets in like your roadway. And so that's, how much of the roadway is clear during a 25-year event. So that's the design storm. And so that's really a public safety issue. It's not really related to the MS4 requirements. And then with the 100-year detention, that's really kind of based off of FEMA. I mean, that's the main storm event that most people look at. And I believe we already have a requirement that you have to analyze the 100-year event to make sure that it has a overland flow path, and not causing flooding issues to homes. And so if we're doing that, then I think we really need to detain to the 100-year if we're saying we're not going to cause flooding at a 100-year event.
Okay, I'm kind of jumping around on you. You said you had more cost assessment and cost change notes. Did you address the downstream impact on any of your other items?
Yeah, so I think in that document, we kind of outline, it'll be a cost to engineering analysis. There could be a potential cost to how much detention is required. But it's very hard to put a number on that. But we kind of outline some of the things that could impact it.
Okay, well, this is it's a complicated process. But I do know that we've got some developers that are very concerned about how this is going to increase their development cost. I've got a lot of people in Southwest Little Rock that, we have flood issues now, so I'm really want to do the right thing in regards to taking care of future flood issues. So I want us to do the right thing, but, I think we're going to have some real questions from the development group about this. So I appreciate your report. I know a little bit more than I did. So thank you.
I will say, in regards to the development and kind of the cost impacts, we have this document which just kind of goes over the general impacts. But we met with a few developers a few weeks ago at the Little Rock Chamber, and we took 3 projects and analyzed those. 2 of them were public works projects, and then 1 was a commercial development.
Okay.
And so we did a full analysis of those using the current manual and then with the proposed manual. On 2 of them, we found a range of cost increase, and I don't want to say like this is the cost increase because there's a wide variety of factors. But in the 3 that we analyzed, we found a range of 4% to 17% increase in cost.
4 to 17.
Correct.
I don't know about development, but that 17 sounds kind of high. The 4 might not be.
Well, and I'll also say that that's only considering the drainage infrastructure. That wouldn't include utilities, roadway, and that cost.
And did it take into account the downstream area for the development, or was it just for the site?
For the 4 that we looked at, it was just none of them would require a downstream analysis based on the manual. So we didn't do that.
So would you say that'd be more expensive when you've got to look at the downstream area?
It's not as expensive as I think as some of the developers are anticipating. It's not a full hydrologic and hydraulic study. It's really just a hydraulic study. So it's just considering just the runoff. So it's really just analyzing another basin.
Okay. And the detention ponds today, it just runs out, I guess. The water runs out, and I think I saw something in your presentation where you have to put maybe sand or something in there to filter the water. Is that on every detention pond going forward with this 100-year flood stage? Or?
No, the water quality, it can be incorporated into the detention. It doesn't necessarily have to be. And you can even just do a extended detention basin, which is not being filtered through sand. It's just a smaller orifice letting out low flow at the beginning until it gets up to those higher storm events. And so it just detains that water longer, allowing for it to settle out.
Okay. So that's a bigger detention pond, right?
It could be. It really depends on the design and of the outlet structure.
Cost. Okay. I've exhausted my questions.
All right, thank you.
I don't know
All
much
right.
to ask.
All right. Director Hines?
You know, I would caution my fellow board members to hear 4% to 17% as being, to use a big word, innocuous. It has a huge impact when you're doing development, when you're building lots, if you want to build, and just do the simple math. Land development, you take the cost inputs of doing the land development, divide it by how many lots you have, and you end up with a per cost lot. So let's just say for math, easy math's sake, if you end up with 100 lots at $100,000 apiece in development cost, the general metric is 6 to 7 times that is what the lot would sell for. So, and this is way inflated numbers, just but for easy math. So if you add 4% to a $100,000 lot, then you multiply that times 6 or 7, you see the impact it has. It's not just the initial 4 to 7, and he's not even he's just talking about stormwater detention. He's not talking about changes to the requirements for our street structure, anything. And I know for a fact that I had some developers looked at the initial deal, and maybe it's changed since you guys had your meeting. They looked at a couple of current projects, and my question is, have you guys looked at any of the current projects we've actually got on the books that we've got real cost on and done any kind of study on that? Because I know one, in fact, they said with the new requirements, it would have not, the development wouldn't have happened. And that's my concern with what we're doing and the pace we're doing it at. One other question, Miles. You used Rogers and Fayetteville, so they do have stormwater manuals?
Yes.
Okay. Why would you use them, and their populations are a fraction of ours? Why would you use them as a comparison?
They're pretty much some of the only other cities in the state that have a drainage manual.
Okay.
But that's also one of the reasons we looked at Springfield, Missouri. It's a similar size. I'd say more similar to Little Rock. It's not a booming growth area. It's just kind of a steady with an older downtown area. And so that's why we also looked at Springfield, because we thought it was a more comparable city.
Right. And I guess I would say that at least you talk about the intensity of pace of development in Northwest Arkansas outstrips ours. I would say the development, Tulsa to me seems like a more similar development pattern, even though they're about twice our size. If you look at how they lay out along the Arkansas River, we go east to west, they go north to south. Their downtown seeing rejuvenation, their midtown's healthy, but all of their growth's in the southern part of the city, much like we have most of our growth in the western part of the city. So, but did you guys look at any current projects? I mean, you said you had a couple, but any of size that would require,
Yeah, so the 3 projects that we looked at were suggested by Timothy Daters. And then we've sent that back to him. What we discussed at our Little Rock, the meeting that we had at the Little Rock Chamber was essentially we would do our analysis, come up with our costs, and then they would also take a look at it with their costs since they've recently done development.
So when you talk about this 4 to 17%, what's the actual dollars on each one of those projects? What's the range? Just real dollars. Percentage. Look, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics is an old term. When you start talking about percentages, a percentage of what? Is it 4% of 100,000 or 4% of 800,000? It's all at the end of the day our taxpayer monies when it's a city project, and we're supposed to be held to the same standards we're holding our development community to. So this has impacts not only for our development community and building affordable housing, but for the city and us doing projects as well.
Mm-hmm. So the one project, which was Zion Square, which is a city public works project, they're building a new street. And so based on that, we'd have to add detention and water quality. And so the increase in cost was $14,000 is what we had calculated. And that was the 17% increase.
Okay.
And then Walker Street, which was just a culvert replacement. That increase in cost was $6,500. And then the commercial development that we looked at, it was a 4-acre site, pretty much entirely impervious. And the estimated cost of, primarily it was, the only change was the water quality, and so that was about 20,000.
Thanks. But y'all didn't look at any potential large acre developments that are on that 20-plus acre?
No, we weren't provided with any.
Thank you, Miles, appreciate it.
Members of the board, if you have projects you would like to send, please send those to HAF. If you want to kind of get a cost estimate, I'm sure they won't have a problem doing that. Because clearly, no one wants to see an increase in costs as relates to development in our city. However, we have to abide by state law from an ADEQ standpoint. So I'm going to ask this question, and then we're going to swiftly go back to the agenda. What are we legally required to do? Meaning that if our MS4 expires in December, when do we have to reauthorize?
So the MS4 process.
I don't want to know the process. I just want to know, once it
So-
expires, when do we have to reauthorize?
So the city has already reapplied. The permit ends December 31st. So we have to have complied with all of the current requirements by December 31st,
From last year?
from 5 years ago or whenever.
If we don't do that, what happens?
Um,
Because what we do by December 31st will project for the next year, correct?
Yes. Yeah. So essentially, if we don't meet the requirements of the permit, I mean, the state could come in with fines.
What kind of fines? Range?
1 second.
I know we're the only city that has to do this, so, but just give us a ballpark. The reason why I'm asking these questions, because I know some members of the board are going to get some questions from developers.
Right.
And then we probably will want to defer it. But ultimately, if we have a clock ticking and we got to abide by law, we're ultimately going to pass it.
Right.
But I want to know what are the options on the table?
So the existing permit, which is under Part 3.2, is penalties for violations, and it's up to $10,000 a day.
A day. Board members understand that. $10,000 a day based off the state, ADEQ, if we don't reauthorize by after December 1st, December 31st, it's $10,000 a day. Is that what you're telling me?
Potentially, yes.
What's potentially? It's either yes or no.
I can't answer for the state on what they would do.
But that's what they could do.
That's what they could do.
All right,
yes.
so up to $10,000 a day. So, second question. We have until December 31st to comply. So theoretically, we could take this issue up the latter part of November.
Yes, if I understand the process correctly, yes.
All right. Thirdly, if we take this up at the latter part of November, are you going to advise to make any changes, or are it still going to be the same results?
I think it would be,
Or is the changes that we have to comply with predicated by ADEQ versus anyone else?
so the water quality requirements are predicated by ADEQ.
Okay, so that
part-
won't change,
Correct.
which will determine, come on, John. You know where I'm going, so.
I think what you're asking is there going to be some change that we have to add to this permit before the end of the year?
Add or decrease, that's
So
what.
right now, we are working with a permit that we got 5 years ago that had this criteria that we have to meet by December 31st.
So this city board, this city, 5 years ago agreed to this.
Yes. as
And now
part
we
of
got to
this permit.
comply.
Yes, sir.
I want to make sure everybody heard that.
Now, January 1, or whenever we get the new permit that will replace the one we're working on now.
Then we got
we'll
5
have
years to
other
apply.
criteria probably attached to it that we'll have that 5 year or whatever window they give us to come into compliance with those permit requirements.
So are you saying, when you say 5 years ago, so that's 29, I don't remember this come, so it must have been 2018 and then goes forward.
Yeah, probably. yes,
So
sir.
sometime around 2018 or early 2019, the city of Little Rock approved and said we would comply by December 31st, 2024. Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
All right. And if we don't comply by December 31st, 2024, it's $10,000 a day, up to $10,000 a day. Potentially.
Potentially.
Every day.
Every day.
All right. So, that's a lot of money. My question is to have, let's say we have some more meetings to make certain we're getting more community feedback. What we've heard from Director Hines, we heard from Director Wyrick. Does anything you presented today change?
I mean, there's potential for some parts of it could change, but the vast majority of it would essentially stay the same.
Because it's predicated by ADQ.
Correct.
All right. So members of the board, what I've heard today, there's not much wiggle room, but we can wait to November. But I also make sure the city board, if there may not be significant changes, there could be some, not significant, because that's predicated. Would the board be willing to take this up latter part of November? Yes. Director Hines?
I'm not willing to commit to anything until we got to the 31st of December until I talk to the folks that have been in my ear about all of the issues.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not ready to commit to saying we'll do it at the end of November when we might need till the first or second week in December. There's a lot of data and a lot of analysis. That's just, I'm not gonna commit to that.
Well, I'm not, I guess, let me make sure, I'm not asking you to commit to anything, but what I'm going to make is a decision. And the decision will be is not to take this up for a vote until sometime in November. Then you as a city board will determine what you do after that. But I also want to make certain the city board is aware that we got to December 31st, no matter who calls us. And if we got to December 31st to make some changes, not significant changes, but after December 31st, it's $10,000 a day. That's not anything that we want. That's what the state is telling us, correct?
Correct, yes.
All right. So members of the city board, we'll take this up. We'll take this up at the agenda meeting, the first agenda meeting in November. Is that okay with everybody? All right. All right. Director Cabeers, then Director Wyrick.
Just, we're putting you in between a rock and a hard place, but we're in a rock and a hard place. We want to be competitive with everybody else. Is everybody on the same 5-year cycle that we had, or is everybody else's cycle different than ours?
I believe the cycle is different for the small MS4s.
But Director Cabeers, I want to make sure everyone's aware. As much as we want to have that conversation, we're not comparable to these other cities because they're smaller. We're the only city that has to do this in Arkansas.
But I will say that the general permit, which is what we based our water quality requirements off of, that does apply to those MS4s. And so whenever they come up to their cycle, they're going to have to comply with those regulations.
So, but, and I thank you, Mayor, for saying that, but I think there's two things that I've taken from that. One, we're going to have an increased cost of building in our community, without a doubt. But secondly, we want to be competitive with Benton, Bryant, anybody else around us. So sometime y'all can get back to us when their cycle is up, if they correspond to our cycle, because I think that makes a big difference on what we do.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk to the state and see kind of when that process happens for them.
I appreciate that information.
Director Wyrick.
I would just like to ask that if we've got some plans in the hopper, Brad may know of some development that's coming up. Can we send them to this company to have them do an estimate, see what the increase would be? I mean, I'm not aware of any subdivisions coming up or any development coming up, but we might have some in planning that's supposed to come up. The other thing I would say is the planning commission voted to send this to the board, and they really didn't weigh in on the issues or anything about it. They just said, send it to the board, they're gonna make final approval. So that kind of gives me a little bit of pause. But if we could get some real developments that are in the hopper and get some cost on those, some that you got to deal with the downstream flow, those kind of issues, then I'd like to see that. And also, can we set up meetings with some of the development community between now and November?
Yes, ma'am. I know there's been some that you were a part of and others, so we can continue to do that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we'll move this to the first agenda meeting in November.
All right, thank you.
All right, Director Hines, did you have your hand up? No. Okay. All right, now we'll go to the agenda meeting. Director Peck?
Thank you. I'll be very, very brief, I promise. In your packet, and I'm mainly doing this for people that are maybe watching, Little Rock Recycles Day is this Saturday, the 28th, from 9 to 12 at the zoo. You can bring anything there. Bicycles, clothing, we're partnering with Goodwill and Recycle Bikes for Kids. If you have sensitive documents, free shredding, glass, e-waste, whatever you have. So come to the zoo 9 to 12. And also on Saturday, at the Rock Creek Trail that was damaged in the tornado, there's a cleanup there. It's been closed for a year. We'll be feeding you lunch, pizza at about 11:30. And the final event is a week from Saturday. It's a Drive Electric Week, and if you have ever wanted to try like an e-bike, Rocktown Outfitters will have them at Repsman Golf Course for you to check out from 4 to 7, as long as EV owners, cars, but the e-bikes are pretty cool. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Peck. All right, any questions on items 1 through 29? Director Hines?
I have questions on 3, 16, and 24. Looks like it. First one on 3, probably Mr. Honeywell.
Yes, sir.
So I've had some questions, folks, that are on Johnson Ranch Road as to why the need for replacement, and just wanted to verify that a lot of this is not as much existing conditions, but preparing for the RDOT expansion of Highway 10.
It's actually maybe a little bit of that, but it's also the existing condition of some of those pipes. We're starting
Okay.
to see failures, and they're old metal pipes.
You just can't see it. The residents can't see it.
Right, yeah,
Okay.
we've gone out and had to do some work on them, and we saw it as an opportunity to get those replaced where they weren't going to fail completely, because it'll cut off that neighborhood if one of those fails.
Okay, super. Let me see, let me go to, next question, I guess, would, it's on the Sasaki and Associates for the $750,000 for the master plan for 30 Crossing Park. So Leland, explain to me what we're doing, because it seems like we just did a big contract with Sasaki for the downtown master plan. I thought they plowed some of this ground, but what are we getting for spending $750,000 for the park?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So what we're getting is this is actually focused on a design of actually the 15 acres as part of the I-30 Crossing Park. So there's a slew of different consultants that are a part of this team, but I'll just go through a brief milestones of the project. This is park site analysis and framework for this park actual design. Community workshops and online surveys would be a part of that. A draft of the downtown district strategy memorandum, park design presentation that would be internal to the city, final park design presentation, community reveal and event, online survey, and final submission. So what this is a detailed design of the 15 acres.
Okay. So, and this takes into account some of the ideas that have been thrown out there by some local think tanks, that type of stuff?
Yes, absolutely. So I included in the process, community involvement, right.
Okay,
Community
all right.
involvement, Studio Maine would be involved.
All
Yes,
right.
sir.
Thank you. And last but not least, this may be a question for HR on 24, the MASSA Medical Transport Services for voluntary medical transport insurance.
Yes, sir.
So this isn't included in, I know on the ambulance authority, we were discussing it today. So many of our private carriers have now put in rates with them and have coverage for their constituents. So this is outside of our current healthcare with, is it United Healthcare?
No, we're with Cigna.
Cigna, I'm sorry. We've changed and I can't keep up. So we don't have any coverage for our employees under the Cigna.
There is coverage, but it's limited coverage. This right here is just a voluntary policy.
Okay.
We're not paying for it, so it's only if the
Okay,
employee
strictly
chooses to
voluntary.
buy.
Okay, cool. I just want to make sure I understood it. And I know that's a big thing that's matriculating up not only through the state, but at the federal level with ambulance covers with private insurance carriers and stuff. So, all right, that's all the questions I have on the consent agenda. Thank you, Mayor.
Director Adcock?
Yes, I would like to have a copy, Tom, of Resolution 12, and I would like to hold this separate.
You like a presentation on 12?
Well, I'd like to have a copy of the presentation and a presentation and hold it separate.
All right. I don't think there's a presentation, but Mr. Willie, Director Henry, if you'll just give a summation of Resolution 12, and we'll make it separate.
Thank you.
So Resolution 12 was to clarify tows of vehicles that weigh over 100,000 pounds, which is basically fire apparatuses, ladder trucks, loaded pumpers, and loaded refuse vehicles. Wasn't very clear in our D-class tow, so we added a E-class tow and the language around that tow, and rebid the contract so that we can get that into what we're currently doing with those things. Should not affect a whole lot of tows. There's not a lot of things that weigh 100,000 pounds, except for those fire apparatuses and loaded refuse trucks. I was very concerned about having novice pick up or try to tow our fire apparatuses for sure. And then when we go out and organize a tow for a loaded refuse truck, it is something to behold. And you'd be surprised at the damage that a tow company can do to one of those trucks. So we want to be very particular about, we will still use the contract tows toward towing companies to do it, but we want to be very involved in that process as fleet services. And that's all that's about.
Mayor, I'll have some additional questions next week, please.
Yes, ma'am. All right. Director Miller?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of observations, questions that deal with fiscal impact. Of course, it's spelled out pretty clearly when something's coming from American Rescue Plan funds or other funds that's spelled out on our agenda. Just a quick question on number 7 for the fiscal impact for this additional funds for the zoo, and it makes reference to these account numbers. What account numbers are those?
This is a part of the 2022 bond.
Are 3 of those?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you. And on number 13, tell me a little bit about what this is. Does this help us with picking up more trash, or is this something
This is
different?
if you recall early, when we bought the first 5, we had another conversation that we were going to buy additional 2 trucks, and these are the additional 2 trucks that we're using with some insurance proceeds.
And Mayor, these also have increased capacity, these 2 trucks.
They're larger.
And it talks about in fiscal impact, of course, it says fleet replacement funds, which include the insurance proceeds. So how much is currently in our fleet replacement fund? Do we still have more money? Can we buy more trucks?
And I want to be clear, we don't technically have a fleet replacement. We have what we have. We don't have a fleet replacement fund. The city hasn't had one. However, we're working to have one, particularly if we get the sales tax passed and some other things that Director Hinton and Director Honeywell are working on. So that's something we're working on for the 25 budget, but the city's never had a fleet replacement program. That's an issue. That's something that we're solving, and we're moving towards that.
So when it says in our write-up, fiscal impact funds for this purchase are allocated in the fleet replacement funds, that's not.
So, Director Miller, every insurance proceed that we get, we direct it toward our fleet replacement fund. The only funds that we ever get from the city on an annual basis that's allocated for fleet replacements is $800,000. I use more than that for Kevin Howard's department. So the mayor is 100% correct. We don't have a fleet replacement fund for everything we have, but every insurance check that we get, we put it in the fleet replacement fund. That's what she means by that.
And it's just nomenclature. I mean, that's all it is. It's not an actual fleet replacement fund. It's a fund that we use to replace fleet when we have the opportunity to. But it's not an ongoing allocation. But we're working to transition that in 25 budget, as well as if we pass the sales tax, we'll be able to work on that as well.
Okay, well, you know, I look at this stuff when it talks about fiscal impact, and I'm trying to figure out where this money's coming from, if we have more funds, because it seems like we can come up with some funds when we need to, but again, maybe that's certainly on the insurance. I understand insurance.
And as we shared, we used some contingency funds, it was an emergency situation for those 5.
So that came from our reserves?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, that's all I had.
All right. Director Computers? Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Going back to Lance's question about number 16, this is what we have talked about of getting the downtown master plan started, and the first step. We have this wonderful opportunity to do something great, but we need to have an overall vision. And the mayor wisely said that we could use $750,000 to do that. Sasaki and then Studio Gang is part of this, right?
Yes.
To combine their efforts to talk about how we get an overall idea of what to do, but you're not specifically saying in this corner this is going here or this corner is going here. Is to give us an overall idea that we can show the public about how we can use this and use it wisely. And then what we'll be able to do is to take a bite here and a bite there and get it done. But if you don't have an overall vision of what's going to happen, we'll end up with a piecemeal development that in the end will not maximize the potential of that site. So I compliment Leland and the mayor for getting this done this way. I think we've got 2 great partners to do it, and I look forward to what they're going to bring forward.
Thank you so much, Director Pierce. And I believe also another local partner is AMR Architects as well, and a woman, minority-owned company. But I just want to add to Director Pierce is that for the public that this is American Rescue Plan Act dollars. Director Adcock, is your hand still up?
No, I'm sorry.
All right. We're going to quickly move, get us back. I don't see here anything from 1 through 29. Any questions on 30 to 32? Director Adcock.
Yes, item number 32,
32.
I'd like to leave it separate,
You want to just separate, no question? All right.
just separate, please.
All right, we'll just keep it separate. Items 33 to 34. Seeing none, 35 to 36. Director Computers.
this is just anticipating that we're going to get out of here quickly, but got one more statement before we get through.
Okay, well, I think we're through. You can go with your statement.
Great. Knowing how when you get towards the end, you're like a horse getting back to the barn. We're moving quick. I sent out a request for a resolution on the board having a project manager, at least on the two big projects and more if we want. And here's the rationale for it. As I am passionately for getting this tax passed, one of the items that people ask me about each time are how are you going to do something this big that we've never done before? When we did the Clinton Library, there was a group that was chosen to do the library, and then there was an owner's representative who worked with them to make sure everything was done the way we wanted it, on cost, on budget, in the money we had. When we did Robinson, we did the same thing. We had a group that did it, but we had an owner's representative that worked with them to make sure that it's ongoing, making sure everything is done the way we need it done. This does not take away from what I feel sure the mayor will do and have a Senate committee to look at all the overall projects. But this is just to give us the opportunity to make sure that what is done, at least on these two big projects, and if more if we want them to be, are done correctly, and that we have a representative from our body that's there every day looking at the cost of doing this. So that's what the resolution is, and I think it'll help reassure the public that what we're doing is correct in the way we're doing it.
And will that be the second meeting in October? Is that?
Yes, we'll do we'll just, if our city attorney can get the resolution, we can do a modification on next Tuesday.
Okay.
Let's
I think it's really important that people know we're doing this, because I think it'll help people have reassurance.
And for those, it'll be for the major projects, being the outdoor sports complexes, but also War Memorial Park and Hyman Park. But we'll determine how it goes, but probably those will be the focuses.
Thank you.
And Mayor, I just wanted to let the board know to look for an email from Ashley asking you to respond about availability for 3 days. Next week, we're going to try and find pockets of time instead of a whole day for a budget meeting. So if y'all will look for that and respond accordingly, that would be great. Thank you.
Director Phillips.
Thank you, Mayor. And Dean, I appreciate you, that idea and the energy to get the tax passed. I share that. And in that regard, this question is for Tom. Will we have to do an RFP, or like what happens to select this person or entity? Like once we pass the resolution, we'll have to still go through that process, correct?
Right,
More
but it'd
than
be an
likely it'll be an
RFQ.
RFQ, I meant, I'm sorry.
And would this resolution be more like a resolution of intent to bid that out if the tax passes?
Right, and that's what I just want to make sure that we're clear on, that we'll still have to go through that process. Yeah. Right, and I want the public to know we're doing it the legal way as well. So I'm with you. Thank you, Director Capiers. I agree with it.
Director Miller.
Thank you, Mayor. And I believe Emily probably addressed this as we're trying to get together for the budget. I know it's been tough to try to get everyone together. I appreciate that, appreciate the efforts for that. I want to make sure that I have a chance to visit with a lot of the public about our budget when we start putting some drafts together, and make sure we think through that, because I have a number of neighborhood associations that I've told them that I wanted to make sure they understood our budget and what we're proposing. So as we think through what we're doing as a board, I want to make sure I have enough time to go out into the public. If we're not going to do anything formal as a body, I want to do something individually as a board member to take this draft out to these neighborhood associations to try to get some feedback on that. So I don't know if there's been any thought about reaching out to the public, because we're having a hard time just getting all the board members together to talk about it. But again,
Yeah, it'll be predicated on when we can all get together first, and so that'll kind of set the clock, and we are keeping that in mind.
okay, thank you.
All right, meeting adjourned.